In the past 25 races, only 2 drivers have won a race that were not Max Verstappen. Those drivers are Sergio Perez and Carlos Sainz. And in that time, they have each won 2 races. But the statistic gets a lot worse if you only look at the last 20 races. In that time, only Carlos Sainz has been able to best Verstappen, and he's managed to do it each time Max was on the cusp of getting 10 victories in a row. After Carlos's victory in Singapore, where he surprised everyone by using the power of friendship, I dubbed him Sainz the Giant Slayer. And now that he's won in Australia while recovering from surgery, I think he's earned that title. Considering these facts, it was a real shock when Ferrari announced that they would be signing Hamilton in 2025, and it would be Carlos Sainz getting the boot. We can argue all day as to whether Leclerc or Sainz is the better driver, and there are good arguments to be made on both sides, but I don't think it's as cut and dry as Leclerc is the better driver when you look at how they've measured up to one another. Sure, Leclerc beat Vettel during Ferrari's years on the struggle bus, but then Sainz finished ahead when he joined the team in 2021. 2022 showed that while Ferrari had the machinery to challenge for the title, neither Charles nor the team were ready for a championship run. There were just too many mistakes from Charles and the team. But even worse was that Sainz took so long to adjust to the car that by the time he got comfortable in it, Red Bull was already running away with the championships. Nobody at Ferrari looked good in 2022. But in 2023, it gets a lot closer. Charles finished 5th in the championship, 2 spots ahead of his teammate, but then Sainz was the only non-Red Bull driver to win a race. If I were to oversimplify the main difference between the 2 drivers, it would be that Charles takes more risks, and when they pay off, he is exceptional. But when the risks don't pay off, it costs him and the team dearly. It's the old bird in the hand versus 2 in the bush conundrum. All that being said, I know Leclerc is Ferrari's golden boy, but it's getting harder and harder to understand why they don't appreciate Sainz. And trust me, they don't appreciate him. There's irrefutable evidence. If you want to see how someone truly feels, look at their actions, not their words. Vasseur was singing Sainz's praises in the press conferences, but nothing speaks louder than when the entire team snubbed Carlos by not showing up to his podium in Bahrain. There was a heartbreaking moment captured on camera by the Spanish media where you can hear Sainz tell his father that only 2 mechanics showed up to celebrate his podium with him. What has he done to deserve this kind of childish treatment? It feels like Ferrari has decided if they're not celebrating a podium with Charles, they're not going to celebrate it at all. It feels like how Red Bull would act if they had Jos Verstappen as team principal and Checo got on the podium when Max didn't. Speaking of Red Bull, that's really who we have to thank for Sainz's success today. Given how Max dominated in both Bahrain and Jeddah, there was no reason to think Australia would be any different. But we were all able to mark ourselves safe from the Dutch national anthem thanks to Red Bull's Employee of the Month, an inanimate carbon brake disc. And Carlos Sainz was there to pick up the pieces. And given that the brake disc actually exploded, there were a lot of pieces to be picked up. Even more concerning though is that it wasn't Checo on top of the podium after Max had his first mechanical failure in over 40 races, which is impressive in and of itself. But right now, I want to talk about Checo. Given how lustily both Mercedes drivers described the speed of the RB20 when they were behind it on track, the fact that Checo finished in just 5th place is unacceptable. If your car is so fast that 2 drivers independently feel the need to comment over team radio as to how fast it is, making up a single place in the Grand Prix is just not good enough. And it's not like Checo started from the back. He lined up 6th place on the starting grid. Max would have almost certainly won the race starting from 6th. And if he ended on the podium, he would have been upset with himself for his lack of performance. And that makes Sainz's win that much more impressive. The odds were definitely not in his favor. He was still recovering from his appendectomy and was clearly still in some discomfort given how stiff he looked while walking around the paddock. There was nothing wrong with Leclerc or his car. And after Verstappen's mechanical failure, there was still another Red Bull rocket ship running around in the top 5. Either one of those drivers should have posed a major threat to Sainz's success. But they didn't, and I attribute that to pure gumption. Carlos doesn't have a drive lined up for next season despite being at the top of his game, and clearly that's a very motivating factor for a racing driver. I mean, it worked for Checo in 2020 where he ended up landing a drive at Red Bull as a result. Maybe Carlos could take a page from Checo's book and land a seat at his old team. I could see him replacing Perez, or maybe even Max if the rumors are to be believed and Jos ends up taking his ball and going to Mercedes. But my God, after that performance today, why would Max ever want to go to Mercedes. Sure, today Max DNF'd because of a sticky brake disc, but that was his first mechanical failure in over 40 races. I've had a sneaking suspicion that Max has been running his engine slightly detuned for reliability reasons. And that Honda power unit hasn't given him any trouble since the first couple races of 2022, so I'm thinking I might be right. Even today, Max's mechanical failure had nothing to do with the Honda power unit. Meanwhile at Mercedes, it was Lewis's engine that contributed to his half of the double DNF. George, on the other hand, took himself out. Or Alonso did, depending on how you view the incident. But according to the stewards, it was Fernando's fault, so let's go with that. The one thing everyone at Mercedes can agree on, though, is that the RB20 is really fast.
That car's fast. Car's like a rocket ship.
Mercedes might not make a lot of sense for Max, but they do make a lot of sense for Sainz. Not only do they have an open seat, but they cultivate a supportive team environment that I think would be very beneficial for Carlos. Unlike the cutthroat world of Red Bull and the callous atmosphere of Ferrari, Mercedes could provide him with the security, support, and appreciation he deserves. If they're even interested in him as a driver, that is. There are a lot of good open seats, but also a ton of great drivers still available. So there's no guarantee he's even in the conversation for that Mercedes seat while there's still a world champion available to be signed. I'm not even going to pretend like this incident would hinder Fernando's negotiations with Mercedes in any way. I'm sure Toto isn't impressed, but if he got upset with everyone that Jorpedo had a tussle with, there wouldn't be anyone left on the grid in his good books. Heck, George even slapped Bottas on the helmet after they crashed when he was still at Williams, and Toto still gave Ben Russell a drive at Mercedes the next year. It seems like the only Mercedes-powered driver that had a good race in Australia was the Canadian Lance Stroll. And here to talk about it, we have the Canadian Positivity Guy with the Canadian summary of the Grand Prix. Aston Martin may not have a car that can challenge at the front this season, but they are clearly the kings of the midfield, finishing 30 seconds behind Red Bull, Ferrari, and McLaren, but still ahead of everyone else. If Nando hadn't been given a 20-second penalty, they would have taken a cool 6th and 7th in Australia. But they didn't, and Lance Stroll was there to score the points for the team and redeem himself after taking himself out in Jeddah. And that's my main problem. I don't want Lance to keep redeeming himself with these odd moments of success. I'm tired of him being my country's representation on the grid, and an unexpected good performance like this is the sort of thing that helps Papa Stroll justify keeping him around. He's had 7 years to up his game and prove he's worthy of the seat, but the only thing he's done consistently is disappoint. Flashes of competence are enough to delay getting fired, but not enough to impress. And at this point, I don't think he's capable of impressing. I would rather have no Canadian on the grid than one who bought their way in and wasn't able to convert that into passable competence within 7 years. Lance technically finished ahead of his teammate, but that was only because Fernando got a 20-second penalty. So it's not like he actually outperformed him. It feels a lot like someone who is consistently late for work, waking up early, and leaving early so they can arrive early, only to show up exactly on time because the extra effort they thought they were putting in was actually the bare minimum they should have been doing the whole time. Kind of reminds me of your mom in bed. And now back to your regularly scheduled programming. For the poll of the week, I asked, which Ferrari driver will finish ahead in the standings this season? Carlos Sainz or Charles Leclerc? And despite Leclerc currently being ahead in the Drivers' Championship, the majority of respondents still chose Carlos Sainz. In fairness, Sainz missed a race due to appendicitis, but given his consistent performance in the last 12 months, or maybe it's just recency bias, but most people seem to think that Sainz is the safer bet. This is how I know no one at Ferrari follows this channel, because it's obvious that Leclerc is their boy, and nothing anyone can do will change that. I'm not even sure the team wanted to change their drivers, but the owner of Ferrari went and signed Lewis Hamilton, so they had to choose one of their 2 top-tier drivers to give the boot. And they certainly weren't going to chuck Charles. What I'm loving most right now is watching Lewis Hamilton with his world champions mindset. As he goes into each race with a doom and gloom attitude, spends all his time on track complaining, and then goes to the press conference to cry about his performance. If I was working at Ferrari, watching Sainz limp around the paddock with so much big dick energy that he can't even walk normally, and then seeing the driver we just signed moping around like he's already been defeated, I wouldn't be very excited for the lineup change next year. Sainz seems like exactly who Ferrari needs, in both spirit and real-world performance. And in typical Ferrari fashion, they've gone and fucked this up too. And now, the spicy joke of the week. Following a crash in free practice, Alex Albon took Logan Sargent's car for the Grand Prix as Williams didn't have a spare chassis available. Albon then proceeded to finish outside the points, a major letdown for the team. When Logan Sargent returns to work on Monday and has to try to lift the team's spirits, it's going to feel a lot like having to comfort your wife after her boyfriend broke up with her. Okay, and now that all the sensitive people are gone, here's the real spicy joke of the week. Daniel Ricciardo rocked up to his home race ready to impress, but then got knocked out in Q1 and finished 5 positions behind his teammate. The whole situation felt like inviting your estranged uncle to Christmas after he promises that he'll be better than last time. But then he shows up half drunk, spends the whole night talking about conspiracy theories, and then reminds you why you don't leave him alone around your kids right before you kick him out. And now I'm kicking you out of this video, but you can go sit at the kids' table, which is my last video where I talk about literal child Ollie Behrman.